Hello everyone and welcome to the Music Professor channel. Happy 2025. It's a new year and a new kind of video, new kind of jumper. So all change on the channel. Loki's still here with me and we're going to talk today about Rachmaninoff. This is a video that I've been kind of asked by Ian Coulter, my collaborator, for ages to talk about Rach 2, Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, and I've kind of put it off because I've never learned it. And it's extremely difficult, but I know it well, and I love Rachmaninoff, and I thought it was high time we talked about him on the channel, even though I can't play the piece, but we thought it might be quite fun if I sort of attempt to read it at the piano and talk about it as I go. And of course, I can't do justice to the concerto, I can't even do justice to the first movement, but we can at least play and discuss the beginning of the first movement. And I'm very conscious on this channel that I've opened so many boxes, so many pieces have been begun, and then the continuation is quite difficult in terms of a second or a third video. And well, let us know your comments about that, because I've yet to work out how to do that effectively, but there are various sequels that need to be made, I am well aware of that. And just to thank you all for your continuing support. We really appreciate your subscribing to the channel. If you like the video, please like and subscribe, press the little bell, and please consider donating, because as we go into 2025, we enormously benefit from all your generosity. So thank you for those of you who support the channel, and thank you to those of you who are patrons. Please consider becoming a patron if you're not one already. So let's plunge in with the backstory of Rachmaninoff's second concerto. Well, Rachmaninoff had a difficult childhood. There were all sorts of problems. His parents didn't get on very well. His father was an aristocrat, but a kind of wastrel, a complete financial disaster. He started his life with lots of estates and gradually had to sell them all until the family was living in a small flat in St. Petersburg. And his parents ended up getting divorced. His sister died of pneumonia when she was 18. All these problems and traumas were there in the background of Rachmaninoff's young life. His talent, his extraordinary musical talent, was clear from the early years, but he enrolled in the St. Petersburg Conservatory, where he did not do well. He was a typical sort of unhappy young man who was sort of truanting from classes and apparently used to fill in reports fraudulently, things like that. So he was quite naughty. And his cousin, Alexander Silotti, who was a pianist and conductor, recommended that he be moved to the Moscow Conservatoire, where he would receive stricter instruction. So he was moved to Moscow, and he had to live in the household of his piano teacher, along with several other students. And it was a very, very strict, very rigid regime. Almost incomprehensible by modern standards, that amount of control, you know, having to live in a house with all these students, and the house belonged to your piano teacher, really bizarre. And so the piano teacher had immense control over him. And I think Rachmaninoff's piano playing benefited a great deal from this. Hello, my friend. Yes. But his teacher enormously disapproved of Rachmaninoff's compositional desires. He didn't think that Rachmaninoff should attempt to compose. He needed to become a great pianist. And of course, the problem with Rachmaninoff, and this was a problem throughout his life, and is a problem today, I think, in terms of the reception of Rachmaninoff as an artist, and that is that he was equally brilliant as a pianist and a composer, which is to say that he was one of the greatest pianists in the world, and he was also one of the greatest composers. And I'm saying something probably rather controversial, because he is a controversial figure. Even his pianism is controversial, and as a composer he's considered controversial. When I was growing up, it was barely appropriate to consider Rachmaninoff as a key figure. I mean, you just didn't do that. When I was a teenager, I thought he was sentimental rubbish. I'd sort of imbibed that view of him, which was common and remains to some extent present within musicology. There's a reluctance to accept that he's a composer of importance, even now, I think, in certain circles. And composers, certainly when I was growing up, were very sniffy about him, guided perhaps by certain bitchy remarks by Igor Stravinsky, who is a composer that I revere too, but he said awful things in the 1950s about Rachmaninoff. And so I think there's an awful lot of weird prejudice, perhaps summed up in the famous Grove Dictionary entry of 1954 by Eric Blom. This is the Grove Dictionary that Blom was editor of. And he wrote in his article in Grove about Rachmaninoff, he wrote this in 1954. In other words, a decade after the great composer's death, he wrote, "His music is well constructed and effective, but monotonous in texture, which consists in essence mainly of artificial and gushing tunes, accompanied by a variety of figures derived from arpeggios. The enormous popular success some few of Rachmaninoff's works had in his lifetime is not likely to last, and musicians never regarded it with much favour." Now, this is meant to be a scholarly article on Rachmaninoff, and can you imagine a more dubious collection of descriptions than the ones that I've just read out? Monotonous in texture is so not the case. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. Consists in essence, so fundamentally, of artificial and gushing tunes. Again, I'm going to demonstrate quite the opposite. Accompanied by a variety of figures derived from arpeggios, which is to suggest that there's nothing of contrapuntal or deeper content within the music. It's just melodies with accompaniment. Again, absolute nonsense. The enormous popular success, there has been that, of some of Rachmaninoff's works, or few of them, actually a decent number. He wasn't a prolific composer. I'd say many of Rachmaninoff's works are enormously popular. Blom's suggestion is that the popularity they had in his lifetime is not likely to last. Well, that is manifestly not true. His work has endured and it remains as popular now as it ever was. And he finishes up by saying musicians never regarded it with much favour. On the contrary, I can't think of a composer more revered by pianists, and most musicians love him. I mean, there are a few composer colleagues of mine who are pretty sniffy about him, but I'd say they're in the huge minority. So I'm well aware, by the way, that I haven't played yet. I must play the piano shortly. But let's just finish the backstory. This is kind of fascinating. There is a backstory to the second concerto, and I've sort of left you in the Moscow Conservatory, haven't I? Let's jump forward a few years. 1897, Rachmaninoff had written his first symphony and was hoping for a great sort of young composer's premiere. Ooh, Loki's doing a bit of growling. No need for that, love. Well, I suppose that is appropriate that Loki growled at that point, because the premiere, sadly, of the first symphony was an absolute catastrophe in 1897, conducted by Glazunov, who didn't particularly like the piece, and by all accounts was probably drunk at the first performance, and the audience received it badly. I think it was badly played. Yes, I know you want to go for a walk, but you'll just have to wait a few minutes. We will take you soon. So the most famous response to the premiere of the First Symphony was César Cui, who was one of the Russian five, you know, the five famous Russian composers of the time, Rimsky-Korsakov and Borodin and so on. He was one of those five. And he wrote a review that said of the First Symphony, if there were a conservatoire in hell, if one of its talented students were instructed to write a programme symphony on the 7 plagues of Egypt, and if he were to compose a symphony like Mr. Rachmaninoff's, then he would have fulfilled his task brilliantly and delighted the inmates of hell. And that's how you write a horrible review that's sort of destined to afflict whoever it is that you're aiming your venom at. And Rachmaninoff was duly afflicted and became depressed and absolutely lost confidence in his compositional powers, didn't compose anything for a couple of years. He was meant to be travelling, I think, to England to perform his second piano concerto, but couldn't write it and ended up, I think, playing the first. He took up conducting, and of course, because he was such an amazing musician and a talented conductor, as it turned out, he began to establish a career as a conductor, a career that he, in the end, didn't really pursue, but could have done. The thing about Rachmaninoff, as I've said earlier on, is his musicality was so prodigious, he could do anything. And this was part of the problem. It's very difficult if you can do everything, to know what to do. And that was a real problem for him. So there we are. We're about the year 1900. His family suggests that he goes to visit his hero Tolstoy, which he does with his friend Shaliapin, the singer, and they performed for Tolstoy. And the trouble with Tolstoy, great artist though he was that he was a pretty insufferable person, and that's not uncommon, a combination of great artist and an insufferable person. He was one of these people who was addicted to his own opinions, whether he really had a right to proclaim them or not. And on this occasion, apparently Tolstoy's response when Rachmaninoff played something of his own was to ask him, what is the need for this kind of music? Which is a sort of awful question to ask anyone, because if you think about it, whoever the musician is, if you say, what is the need for this kind of music? What kind of answer is there? Music doesn't really have, it doesn't function like that. It's not a utility. It might enhance everyone's life, but can you answer that to Tolstoy? Can you say, oh, well, it's life enhancing? I mean, come on, you can't say that. So poor old Rachmaninoff was not helped by that. He also said a couple of other bizarre things. He said that all Beethoven was nonsense. I mean, I would have thought that remark might have encouraged Rachmaninoff, because anyone who thinks that all Beethoven is nonsense is an idiot, in my opinion. So, you know, end of any validity to anything he said about music. And the third thing that I remember Tolstoy said, he sort of took Rachmaninoff aside at one point and said, I must tell you, I must speak to you, I dislike it all. So in other words, everything that he and Shaliapin had played to Tolstoy and a small gathering of friends in Tolstoy's house, you know, he sort of sought Rachmaninoff out just to tell him how much he disliked it. I mean, what an irritating person. So that's the Tolstoy story. It didn't help Rachmaninoff's self-confidence. He returned home. His family, in a state of desperation, suggested he visited a doctor, Dr. Dahl, who was a neurologist who lived in the same street. So Rachmaninoff went to visit Dr. Dahl, who also had some kind of hypnotherapeutic treatment. And as far as I can tell from the sessions that he had with Rachmaninoff, he was kind of brilliant. Because what he would do is they would have a chat. He'd sit Rachmaninoff by the fire. He was a music lover himself, so he probably spoke very encouragingly to the young musician. And then he would leave Rachmaninoff with the words, you will write your second concerto, you will compose it with facility, it will be a fine work. So he would repeat this sort of mantra to Rachmaninoff, who would sometimes fall asleep, I believe, by the fire with these words of encouragement. And as the weeks went past, Rachmaninoff began to gain his confidence again. Isn't it? That's a lovely story, because it tells you that sometimes what young musicians really need is somebody to tell them that they're okay. They spend musicians spend so much time being judged and criticised. I mean, it's true, this happens now. And musicians are no fun either. They're always carping at each other or saying bitchy things about each other. There are exceptions to this. But we and I'm addressing fellow musicians, we as a community need to be more generous. So Dr. Dahl was a bit of a hero in this story. And when Rachmaninoff completed his second concerto, he dedicated it to Dr. Dahl. So it was no small input. It was an absolutely significant input into the success of the work, which was then premiered, I think in 1902, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 1902, and was a great success. Although, prior to the performance, Rachmaninoff had a nasty cold and had been stoked up by his family on mulled wine, so almost a danger of a repeat of the catastrophe of the First Symphony, that he was slightly inebriated during the performance. Unbelievable, but there we are. The other thing that upset his confidence somewhat was a friend of his wrote to him to say, have you noticed, Rachmaninoff, that the second theme is rather too much like the first theme? And this too had troubled him, because he thereafter sort of wondered whether he needed to recompose the first movement. Thank God he didn't recompose it, because of course the second theme is amazing. Right, let's get on to it. So those of you who are fans of the channel know that There is often something slightly reactive, spontaneous about these videos, and that's going to be the case today because I never learned this concerto. As I said earlier on, I didn't like it as a youngster when I could have learned it, I suppose, and when I was in my 20s, I encountered it really as a live experience, and it was that bowled me over. And I've always known this piece very much as a listener, as a music lover. There's one particular passage in the coda of the first movement that converted me to Rachmaninoff. I suddenly realised when I was listening to a live performance of it in my 20s, when I was really keen to dislike it, there was a passage that had such harmonic beauty and extravagance and a kind of progressive quality, almost like early Schoenberg, that completely changed the way I viewed Rachmaninoff. I suddenly realised he was much more harmonically interesting than I had thought he was. Okay, let's begin. So here's the famous opening. Now, I think that this opening, maybe, and I'm going to ask you what you think about this, it might be one of the most extraordinary openings of any concerto. Perhaps, it's not, I was going to say perhaps it's my favourite, but I think the Ravel concertos are definitely as good in all respects. Well, actually, in my opinion, they are unparalleled, the two Ravel piano concertos, but that's a topic for another video. But I can't think of many concertos that begin so compellingly, partly because it's pianissimo, and partly because it isn't on the tonic, it's on the subdominant, it's in this strange location. So he starts in F minor with this huge and beautifully spaced chord. I sometimes wonder if he's influenced by Beethoven's Fourth, which also begins solo piano, quietly, with this marvellous G major chord with its unique sonority, unique character. Rachmaninoff's F minor, with this huge 10th in the left hand. He had an unusually huge handspan. And so he could do it, he could play it unarpeggiated, and he could play it pianissimo. It's already a sort of testimony to his pianism that he could just produce this. You can hear a recording of him, by the way, I think it's 1948 recording of him playing the piece. He plays this opening faster than most people. Pianissimo with this tolling bell, marvellous. And this expanding middle voice, and then A in the middle, back to A flat, back down to D, back down to D flat, and then these tolling, and then the cadence with that huge grace note in front of that wonderful sort of delayed arrival on C minor, and you suddenly realise, we were talking about Beethoven's Fifth a while ago, the ambiguity, the tonal ambiguity of that. Is it E flat or is it C minor? This is similar. You assume that this is the tonic and it isn't, and the whole thing is a huge plagal cadence that's going there. Plagal cadence always has a connotation of religiosity or of solemnity. So it's, and then it's mixed with the bells, so there's something kind of grave and solemn about it. And then best thing of all, perhaps, is this wonderful movement inside the chord of that to go from a C to a D flat to a D, so this rising chromaticism to the E flat, and then this wonderful middle chord, which is, isn't that, it's just F7, but it sounds like this kind of amazing thing, because he's turned the minor third into a major third, and then you realise the whole thing's a palindrome. It returns the way it came. So this is the central bar of the passage. Then it turns back to A flat. Then it goes back to D. So in other words, the fifth bar is this chord. And then the sixth bar turns back to the chord that was in the fourth bar. The seventh bar goes to the chord that was in the third bar. And then we return to the D flat. The D flat means it's a sort of Phrygian relationship between that. Phrygian because the Phrygian mode has a minor second. There's the minor second. So it's kind of an exotic chord with that wonderful D flat in it, that sort of dark, poignant thing. Then the sixth, the fourth, the fifth, and then C minor, and that marvelous bomb motif the thing, going back to Eric Blom's hideous criticism of Rachmaninoff in 1954, is it's all nonsense. These, if it were true in any way, those four notes would simply happen and that would be that. But they're actually intrinsic to the piece, as we will see, that da ba ba motif, which cadences in this sort of extraordinary way into C minor, with the inexorability of fate itself. That is a big motif in the piece. We'll look at that in a minute. So there it is, and then like a great cataclysm, it resolves onto C minor. Now look, Eric Blom said that all Rachmaninoff's piano parts have arpeggios. Well, only in the sense that Bach preludes have arpeggios. Bach preludes do have arpeggios, but within the arpeggios there are all these wonderful voices moving around in a kind of contrapuntal way. So you're very aware of the horizontal element. I would say that Rachmaninoff has one of the greatest talents for a kind of Bachian inner contrapuntal movement of any composer I can think of. I don't know if he learnt it directly from Bach or whether it was his hero Chopin, whose music he revered, but there is a constant counterpoint going on inside these piano figurations. So for example, you've got, look at this. So you've got that little da-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, that little motif going on inside those. So you've got this lovely motivic element in there. But what you really notice when you're hearing it played up to speed is this marvellous kind of swinging back and forth of the bass note. Now, this is the point where the melody comes in, and the melody isn't in the orchestra. He took a leaf, I suppose, out of various composers, Schumann perhaps most noticeably. Well, I suppose even Tchaikovsky, who was his mentor as a young composer. Even Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto opens with these famous piano chords, which are essentially accompanying the melody in the orchestra, but in a very different way. Here, the melody is, if you look at the orchestra on its own, there is no harmony at all. All the orchestra is playing is this. So all the violins and the violas and the clarinet, sort of mixed into that lovely rich mix, are playing the melody, which is a bit like a Russian, almost like a Russian Orthodox chant. Rachmaninoff had a genius for constructing these gorgeous long melodies with very, very few notes. Many of them are adjacent, and underneath, the bass is just doing pizzicato, keeps coming to the cadence point, and then restarting. And then back, there's a plagal cadence there, back to the opening, and only at this point, this amazing moment here, when the horns come in, do we get harmony. And isn't that an amazing chord? He's already demonstrated he's a genius, because what would you normally do? I don't know. You'd expect something else. You wouldn't expect, oh, that German sixth. And then the sudden shift to the dominant, all marvellous. And then underneath, the piano, okay. These are not all rhythmically the same, by the way. Sometimes you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the next one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Next one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they vary in content, but you can hear that there are all these lines inside it, you know. Let me bring out certain voices, particularly in the right hand. Just like a Bach prelude, wonderfully interesting and beautiful and logical. Sorry, that one is there. second statement of the theme, da 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 da. The German sixth, da. Hang on, da 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 da. Now here's where the cellos on their own take the tune. He's a great master of rhythm, Rachmaninov. Look at this. 1 and 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 and 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Do you notice? Here's another amazing chord. Oh, that's not what you expect, is it? The D flat 7, extraordinary. That melody is beautiful because of the way that it keeps falling on different accent points. It's another lovely adjacent thing, sort of probing its way up, gradually climbing to the D, and then higher than before, the F. It's another surprise at the E flat 7. Horns, da, 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 D7, oh yes, half diminished. Horns again, can you hear those horns? Da, look at this, look at the horns underneath the melody. Da, 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 da. Look at that, marvellous. Marvellous counterpoint. Look at the horns. Neapolitan. So amazing, so inexorable. But then the piano, we don't cadence fully, the piano then has a little solo of its own, just playing over the clarinets. It's not the easiest piece to sight read. Now, here's one of, remember Eric Blom saying, oh, there's no variety of texture. Look at this, fantastic little filigree passage. With these, I don't know if I'm going to attempt to sight read this, but it's all pianissimo. Sorry, that's wrong. A sudden shift to A flat. Isn't that so beautiful? Like a lovely little sort of lacy thing. Here he has a little canon, talking of Bach. Look, left hand. Bet no one's ever noticed that before. Well, I'm sure pianists have noticed it, but it's not something you notice in performance. Left hand just behind the right. Not a strict canon, but wonderfully effective. And so profoundly musical somehow. And then, okay, here's the cadence point. Rachmaninoff loves this kind of thing where he just energizes the music. 2, 1. So you've got this wonderful, you can make a perfect cadence sound amazing. Bass, the timpani underneath, ba 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 ba. So that da 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 da. It's like a pop song. Da 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 da. The orchestra does this unexpected and marvellous shift to E flat, very quick transition, and the clarinets with the, I'm just reading the, bloody hell, tenor clef. Yes, little beautiful cello link into the second subject. These are not easy chords to write. Look at that. I mean, that cadence, other contemporaries of Rachmaninov, so possibly Warlock would have used that, or Delius, or Percy Grainger. But you know, these are not straightforward. That D flat, you actually expect G flat major. I mean, somehow the resolution is so brilliant and unique, and because it's done with such facility, I think no one really, least of all Eric Blom, noticed how extraordinarily clever it was. Here's another one. These lovely chromatic voicings. Look at this. Look at how that second chord, an appoggiatura really to this half diminished chord, it just sounds so good. But besides all that, look at the flow of the melody. Can you think of a better melody? Peaking there, dropping back to the dominant. It's just perfect, isn't it? Yeah, so it's the opening of the second subject. Now, this video cannot go on forever. If you want more about Rachmaninov, this piece, I'm very happy, or any other piece. We've got to the second subject. We can talk more about this marvel, because it is a marvel. The second concerto. It's become such an icon of popular culture. You know, so many films, for example, have used this music as a sort of trope of romantic love. Because the melodies, far from being artificial and gushing as Eric Blom had described them, they are in fact magnificently authentic. They're the opposite of what Blom said. They somehow are heart-rendingly beautiful. They come from Rachmaninoff's soul. You know, he was a guy who felt things. It's marvellous music. I did promise you that I'd explain how the dum, bum, 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 how that figure works its way into the motivic structure of the piece. Well, all the time you're getting these cadence points and things within the melody itself. For example, that da 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 da. You can hear those notes within the melody itself and in the bass. So it's sort of there within the melodic fabric of the music. But there's also that marvellous moment at the recap when the melody returns, and he adds this magnificent counter subject, in effect, this thing. That thing, isn't it amazing? That, do you recognise that? So there the notes are sort of built into the counter subject of the recap. And the other beautiful thing is the way in which, at the recap, the second subject comes in as a horn solo. Do you all remember this? Over the strings, no piano at all in the recap. Just horn with, that's a bassoon underneath, horn at the top. Here comes the piano, and look at this, da da da. Did you ever see those notes as the wind instruments climb? That's turned into Neapolitan, and then at the top, piano does this, and then the whole of the coda now plays with those notes, modulating to different places. This is one of my favourite bits, but we can't look at it now. It's just, that's for you to think about. And listen to this amazing piece. It's structured so perfectly. It's as good as any German composer. It's magnificent. Rachmaninoff too. I've made a case, I hope, for a piece of music that isn't some kind of sentimental trope. It isn't just a warhorse. It is a masterpiece, a real, genuine, compositional, spectacular, technically, a spectacular compositional achievement by a young Russian composer who went on to even greater things later in his career. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe and consider donating. We really appreciate your gifts. Thank you very much.